Excellent. Now, today's webinar really explores the important role that male leaders can play as allies in women's sports. So, advocates, decision makers, and helping us creating more inclusive sporting environments through intentional leadership, listening, practical action, and opportunities that they can influence the culture, remove barriers, and create pathways for women and girls to thrive in sport. So we have Ben, who was formerly from Basketball Tasmania. He's recently just relocated back to Adelaide, where he's working with hockey. And we also have Damian Smith from hockey, Tasmania as well. So a bit of a hockey theme. However, they're going to give some really great examples of their time within the Tasmanian sector and how their organisations have identified some participation gaps, developed some amazing female-focused initiatives, strengthened their leadership pathways, secured some funding, and embedded these strategies for women and girls. Now, we've specifically chosen these two sports because hockey has a really great track record of 50-50 participation, whereas basketball, I believe Ben might correct me if I'm wrong, was about 30% females participating, and what they've done to really improve and make a change on that. So hopefully today's conversation is going to give you some inspiration and support, whether you are a male or female, and how we can better use these allies to get some great results. So please join me today in welcoming Ben and Damien. We are going to hand it over to Damien first, who's going to tell us the amazing things they're doing at Hockey Tas.
Great. Well, thanks, Philippa and Joe, and hi to everyone. Hopefully, I can provide some insights on the journey I've taken as CEO over the last 8 years here at Hockey Tasmania. Uh, you know, as Philip has sort of touched on, we are very fortunate to be 50-50 gender split. But that doesn't mean we haven't got challenges. And coming into this role, I thought, oh, I know everything about how things work in hockey. Our program's all great, but we knew that we had some fundamental gaps in the way we actually manage our sport. So I'll just touch on some of those insights today in terms of the journey that I myself have taken as a leader, and the way it sort of shaped my thinking and change. And I'm actually a different person and leader today than what I was when I first started 8 years ago, without a doubt. I just don't assume anything, particularly in our female participation space, because as I say, we knew we had some fundamental gaps in the way we managed our sport. So I'll touch on those. But I'll open up with, creating opportunities for women and girls isn't just about ticking the diversity box. It's about making better decisions for, particularly our sport. And if you're intentional, participation grows, leadership improves, and your organisation absolutely becomes stronger. We know that. We've gone on a journey now, and we've seen the results of some of the things we've been working on. And with things like inclusion just doesn't happen by accident. And that's what I thought when I first came into the role. I thought, oh, we're the most inclusive sport ever, 50-50 split. But again, that's not the case. You've got to work at it. Every strategic decision that we make, we asked basically, this has been over the last probably 3 years really, that we've fundamentally focused on these three things is, who are we missing? Why aren't they participating? And what are the barriers? What barriers are we creating? So I had some exceptionally good board members, and I've got an exceptionally good board now. I've got a great, diverse board, and they were challenging me as CEO around some of these things, which was really good. So it was coming from top down, which I think is really important as well in terms of creating that statement to the sport that we're serious about some of these things. They're not just words on paper; they're things that we want to action. We do that every board meeting basically, and I've got some really good board members that make me accountable around some of these decisions that we do make in terms of how we manage our sport. So some of the things we worked on, representation matters at every level. One of the biggest things that we've done is deliberately improve female representation, and we do it through, our board recruitment. So we make sure our board is diverse, and I'll touch on why that's important in a moment. Leadership pathways, our coaching pathways, officials, even my staff. We've got a really diverse team of staff here, which is really important, and through our volunteer network as well. So, and the reason we have focused on that and deliberately focused on that is, if young girls can't see women coaching, umpiring, leading boards, running our programs, from a staffing perspective, they're less likely to believe those roles are for them. So they've got to see it to believe it, as we all know. And they're the statements we hear a lot But we fundamentally know that diversity creates better decisions. There's no doubt about that. And different perspectives and challenging the thinking. And I know that, like, so I've touched on our board. Our board, when I first started, was predominantly all male. And it's not now. We've got a really good split, diverse split, male and female. And the conversation absolutely has changed. No doubt about that. And we have focused more heavily in the areas that we needed to. So some of the things we've done when we're building our programs, we listen first is probably the first key piece. When we've created programs like walking hockey the last couple of years, we sort of asked why. What was the why? Why did we create this program? And we knew we had participation gap. Women, who'd played our sport for many, many years were leaving the sport because there wasn't an option that suited where they were in life. So we had to come up with some other ideas. So what sort of program should we run? And what do women actually want is the other thing. So we were asking those questions, and it was just me that was doing that. It was board members and through our clubs and membership, which was really important. And that led to things that came up like, one areas of focus was walking hockey was absolutely one thing that we could trial, and it's been highly successful. A master's focus, which I'll touch on in a moment, which has been highly successful again. Flexible participation options, that social connection is really, really important. We've established, and just lower commitment sort of opportunities for women. The walking hockey one just touched on, we've got 50% female participation in that. And so it showed to us there was a genuine need and demand for a more flexible sort of format, which I think there's over 300 participants doing that across the state now, which is amazing. We thought we might have 100, but got 300 people doing it, which is amazing. So we're really, really rapt about that. And the other thing we looked at in our thinking is we just don't recruit girls. We want to retain women. And I think that's the key to it. I think that some sports miss that point. We're all our own worst enemies. Sometimes we focus on juniors and schools and our numbers, participation numbers, but we consistently lose women that are actually already engaged in our sport. So, we went down to rabbit holes as to, why do women leave our sport? And we know, that there's, work, uni, children, caring responsibilities, there's confidence. And what confidence was a real key one, actually, which surprised the heck out of me. I thought, wow, that's a really interesting one. Injuries and again, lack of flexible sort of formats. So we deliberately invested in, like I say, walking hockey programs, our masters competitions and programs within our masters cohort, more social opportunities, our grant that I'll touch on in a minute in Her Path to Play program, which is around women's festivals. Yeah, and those flexible opportunities are just key to it. Our women's masters is exceptionally strong. We're wrapped with how that has grown over the last 2 or 3 years. We've got 60% of our masters participation is women. And it wasn't like that 3 years ago. It was the other way around. I reckon it was 60-40. There was a 60% participation rate to our men in our masters cohort, but it's absolutely swung the other way. And we haven't lost men. We've just grown our women competition. We've got, I think, there's 4 divisions within it, and they only had 1 initially. So we've really made a concerted effort to get more women playing our sport in that space. So there's and the other part of that, we also attracted the national the Australian Championships for Masters women, which was another thing we did like during this period, just to demonstrate to them we've got this coming as well. So it was the lead up to it. So we were creating opportunities all the way through, and not everyone wants to play at that level, but the fact that we actually had that opportunity, it just provided sort of clear evidence to us that it gave us an opportunity for women to stay involved in the sport, and it absolutely worked. It's fundamentally worked. So it's been fantastic. So just touching on the grant, so we're always looking for ways we can fund things, but it's not about, we don't like with we call our program Her Path to Play program. It's not about the funding. It's about what's the philosophy. What are we trying to get out of the program? It's all right to go and get money. We all try and every sport's trying to sniff out dollars here or there, but what are we actually trying to achieve here, and what was the philosophy around it? So some of the key themes and ideas around that particular program is there's co-design principles within it to address the gaps. We touch on all those things that we're aware of, and the reasons why we have those gaps. You know, removing the barriers, childcare, affordable registration. You know, trying to make it really accessible for women. Equipment access. You know, we will have sticks and whatnot to make it really really easy for the participants to come in. There's a wellbeing component as part of it. Leadership opportunities. We explore. We sit down and work out how they can get engaged outside this particular program. So it sort of takes on a holistic approach, and that social connection is another key thing that we absolutely picked up in the walking hockey participants. They just love that social cohesion, which is really important part of it. So we'll sort of work through that as part of that particular program as we roll it out. So it's this Her Part to Play program. It's designed specifically to engage groups that have traditionally been underrepresented for our sport as well. You know, like including teenage girls, women, 50-plus-year-olds, culturally diverse women, and women we're targeting on the Northwest Coast as well, because we know we've got some fundamental issues in that region, and we're always trying to find ways that we can engage people. We've done that. Walking hockey is another one we've done, and we know that's working on the Northwest Coast. It's been highly successful. So we're at with that. So we're going to apply similar principles around how we've rolled that out, particularly on the Northwest Coast. But even with the walking hockey stuff and Her Part to Play program, it's not going to be, we don't measure success on how many people turn up to our programs. We measure success on, are they going to be engaged with us next year, the year after? So how do we keep them is a success measure for us. We want to keep them in our sport. So it's not just about program delivery or numbers, because we all do our reporting and we go, oh, wow, it was great, fantastic. Got 300 people doing walking hockey. We want to keep them as long as we can. So that's the success for us, which sort of changes the way you think about things at the end of the day in terms of how you measure, the programs you're actually delivering. Mm, So I suppose there's three key sort of leadership lessons I've learned, I suppose, along the way, and the organisation to a degree as well. And the first one is to be intentional. I think it's really, really important. Be intentional. If you don't deliberately focus on women and girls, nothing will change. And that's when I first started in Mara. I thought, oh, no, we're good, 50-50. But I knew, and it took a couple of really good directors actually on that board to say, actually, we have got a few gaps here. You thought about that? I said, oh, no, I haven't actually. So it really made us think about that. And it was a deliberate focus and intent on what we did, and it's actually working, which is great. And again, listen more than you assume. Again, which is what I sort of touched on. The best programs aren't designed by me on my board. They're designed through listening to people and participants. Through our surveys and our club network and whatnot, we're listening to people and what is it? What is it you guys want? What do you think? Where are the gaps from your perspective? So we're always picking up good lessons in that regard. And the third one is think beyond participation. Participation is only one measure in sport. It's heavily focused on in all sports. Obviously, we always rattle off our numbers and whatnot. But the real success, again, is how you retain people year on year and how women in particular get involved in coaching. Coaching roles, senior coaching roles. I've just pointed, unlike some other states, we've got a female head coach that's coaching our Tigers, and we think that's really important as part of our program. And all the way through our start team program, we've got a lot of female coaches as well. Coaching boys teams, not just girls. It's we try and find real mix and intent there to try and the point as many women in those spaces in the official space. Like I say, our board diverse. We actually fundamentally and make and very overt in regards to making sure if we need some female directors, we go and get them. So it's really important we maintain that diversity. And I've seen, like I say, that change over the years in terms of the conversations we've had at that level. And so on and so forth through volunteers and we try and find mentors, women mentors to help, particularly in that coaching space and whatnot. We're always trying to find people that actually can play a role, a leadership role. I think it's really, really important they see women taking on those roles. And my role, I mean, I find it increasingly, I'm a male CEO, but I went on to a conference last week with, all the other CEOs from around Tasmania, and, the diversity is still not great. So, I like to think some of the could slip into my role is not a male. It could be, female CEO of our sport, and I think there should be more of them. But we've got to create those opportunities. I think it's really, really important. It comes back to that, some of those things that I sort of touched on. So, look, in closing, as a male leader, I suppose my role isn't to speak for women. I see my role as is to remove the barriers, create opportunities, and ensure women have every chance to lead, participate, and shape the future of our sport. And if we can do that, I think everyone benefits, not just women and girls, but our club system in our communities, in our sport as a whole is in a much better position. That is me, Philippa. Hopefully that didn't go too long or too less.
No, that's great. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Damian while we're here on his model? We can come back at the end as well. Oh, there we go, Matthew. Hey, Damien, you said that there's no doubt about that when it comes to diversity improving decision making and creating better outcomes across the sport. Even though the research is clear that you're right, unfortunately, my experience is that there is doubt about that in the minds of many male leaders. How have you gone about changing attitudes and educating male leaders?
Yeah, I see my role as doing just that. I think coming back to the point sort of I made before is you listen more than you assume, I think is really key to it. You just don't have a set way of going about it. Uh, and like I say, I've listened to some really good people in our community on boards and through our club system around some of the gaps and the way I needed to lead that change. And I see that. So you've got to walk your talk, basically. It's not just like say you put in for funding and program delivery and just run and thinking, oh, I've solved that problem. You've really got to you've got to have that intent, real intent. And I do it through my team and staff. I know the board starts at our board. And like I say, we set the culture, I suppose, and that's what I try and do. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, we can come back at the end and circle round, but while we are running on time, we'll hand it over to Ben, who's going to share his experience with Basketball Tasmania. But thank you, Damien.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. And thank you, Damien. I think you've covered a fair few of the sort of key points that I'll probably reiterate a little bit. We at basketball in my time there, we were successful in getting a grant for the Play Our Way grant from the federal government. And through that, we engaged a young woman by the name of Lara Scholes to head up the delivery of that program. And I think a few of the points you just raised, Damien, it was a great opportunity for her to pick up the ball and run with, coming up with some strategies to address the barriers that are things that I would never have even thought of. And that's, I think, where you're sort of headed with listening and rather than assuming is that, the Her Court program that Lara's rolling out at the moment is based around schools allocating their court space for one day of the week to be a girls only court space. She identified that as a barrier that the girls in a primary school setting literally can't get on the court to play basketball. I wouldn't have identified that as a barrier. I would have thought the court's there, why aren't they playing? But her perspective was really valuable to say, well, actually, that is the barrier, that if you don't create the space for the girls, they won't get started in the first place. So she was that was a strategy that she picked up and ran with, and that program's going great guns at the moment. There's over 70 schools around Tassie. Last time I checked, I'm sure it's more now, that are signing up for that and just building confidence in the sort of entry levels and first steps into the sport. And again, it's not the sort of thing that I would have considered or thought of. And engaging her through that grant was really, really valuable for us. And similarly, the only other thing I'd add around intentional sort of direction around making sure that as a male leader in sport, I can't have a blind spot on women's participation, engagement, recruitment, development, leadership. All of those things have to be front of mind for me. Otherwise, I'm not doing my job properly. So being super intentional about that. But one thing I picked up, I was talking to an HR recruitment expert from one of the big sort of utility companies at a function a year or two ago. And they just highlighted the sort of language you can use in your job ads around if you want to specifically recruit female applicants, the sort of words to include and the words to look out for. And it was really, really good advice around just trying to frame up right from the outset the way you described a job or a role. in a way that made it more attractive for female applicants and more likely that you were going to get female applicants. And that was another bit of advice that it was, again, something that I would not have considered. It hadn't ever entered my mindset. But yeah, by listening to people that actually know what they're talking about and not assuming I know everything, which is clearly obvious, that's been really valuable to us. The only other thing I'd say with our grant application that we did with the Play Away grant is I delved into the various research documents and the research that was being referenced in the grant process, and I basically mirrored all the language they were using and threw it back at them and aligned it with our project so that it was all sort of resonating, if you like, and speaking the same language. So that would be the only other tip I have around, getting the resources, and because, female participation for basketball was a strategic priority. 35% of players are female, only 20% of coaches, and only 15% of referees. I haven't yet got the stats for hockey, Damian, but I know it's close to 50-50 for players, but I'd be stunned if it's 50-50 for coaches and referees. So, every sport I think is in a similar space where, if we can get more women in leadership positions, coaching and refereeing the sport, it actually makes the whole environment more attractive for female players and young girls starting in the sport anyway. So, still got plenty of work to do over here in Adelaide, and I'm sure, for the rest of my career, it'll always be a priority that we're probably trying to be a little bit more, as you say, intentional is a good word, around what we're doing in the female space, and not just assuming it'll look after itself or that it's not important. Because, if we do that, we will fail dismally. I'm not going to rabbit on anymore. I think we'll throw it open to questions, Philippa.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have any questions, you can pop them in there or even take yourself off mute. I'm curious, so there's a lot of evidence that suggests that clubs and organisations become more successful with more, representation on the board. How does the dynamic, have you noticed, change when you have, for both you, more female directors or more female staff on board?
Yeah, I'll go first. The board at Hockey SA is actually only 5 at the moment, 4 of whom are women. We've just recruited another male, so it's still way over the equity, if you like. It does ensure that you don't make the really bad and obvious stuff ups. And I don't know if anyone from cricket's on this call. I don't think there is, but I can tell you that back some years ago in cricket, organising the end of year. Oh, sorry, Joe's on the call. Organising the end of year celebrations, they forgot to invite the women's team. There's some pretty bad things can happen if you haven't got your absolute finger on the pulse and front of mind application to what you're doing.
Yeah, look. I suppose from our perspective, as I touched on it, it just changes the conversation really, and you have a broader conversation about the things you do really, and that's what we've found. I mean, there's just more intent and focus on areas we wouldn't have otherwise gone to. I don't think so. I think that's why we fundamentally do it, Philippa, in some respects.
Joe, have you got questions?
I'm just going to jump in with a question, and yes, interesting point, Ben, and that was actually something that was raised a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago. So that
it was a true story, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And in fact, a conversation came up. It might have been the second last board meeting. Someone said, "Oh, why do you have your staff party or whatever, staff conference, staff get together in July?" We talked about it, and then that came up as a point of the conversation around the Christmas party, etc. So, yes, it did happen. I just wanted to go a little bit further than just gender, but also, Damian, I think you talked about culturally and linguistically diverse, so CALD women. You also talked about the Northwest Coast, but have you got, for either hockey or basketball, Tas, any kind of real examples or tactics or strategies you've used or approaches that, whether they worked or didn't work, to get into a broader female community in that space?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, Joan. Look, we're certainly not done yet by any means. I suppose the walking hockey opportunity, and we did focus on the Northwest Coast with that particular program. And look, it hasn't been easy, I've got to say. Like, we've had to really work hard at it and, provide as many wraparound support as we can for it. I think that's key to it, in terms of other partners we engage along the way, and even with the, through Women's Health and Education Network, we try and do that. So it's not just about hockey as such, you know what I mean? You've got to think more broadly than that. And I think that's why we did get traction on the Northwest Coast with particularly 50-plus-year-old women that are involved in our walking hockey. It was around that. It was having more of a holistic approach to that delivery as opposed to come and do hockey. So I think that's sort of one of the things. But like I say, we still have some way to go. Like, it's really our first, the walking hockey one. And obviously as we roll out our next program, Her Part to Play program, I mean, that's another opportunity for us to test a few things. But we're still testing some things around that. And it's building having those really robust relationships. And we've got some really good relationships, absolutely. But I think as we develop those, things will evolve even more. And that's what I'm hoping to achieve. Yeah.
I'll jump in there, Joe. FIBA, International Basketball, has got some very good uniform recommendations, and we do have some athletes in our youth pathway programs in Tasmania where the uniform allows for them to wear culturally appropriate dress but still play basketball. That's led by FIBA internationally. But in terms of specific strategies or interventions or anything that we've tried, nope. That's one to still consider going forward. I think hockey at the moment is thinking very carefully about how we engage the South Asian community more broadly. We think it's a huge opportunity. So, yeah, still got plenty to learn in that space.
Yeah, thanks, guys. That's when I think about a little bit in regard to all sports and recreations, but also with my cricket hat on as well. And there's, I mean, certainly if you're looking at the Southeast Asian or in India, etc., those countries, such a massive level of interest in cricket. And some amazing at an elite level and an international level. But how do we get that happening and make the sport more multicultural at a club and a grassroots level, particularly with girls in Tasmania?
We, like last year, Joe, during our Hockey One league, we had a weekend where we didn't charge, and we had the Indian community come and do their annual festival at the Hockey Centre. And it wasn't necessarily focused on just women, but it was part of that, was part of our tactic, if you like. So we had about 350 people from the Indian community here doing their festival on the day. So that's one initiative that we're going to tap back into again in this year's Hockey One. And we also tied it in with our Pro League international event we had here in February. We had the Indian men's team here, not the women's team, unfortunately, but we had the men's team. We engaged our Indian community again. So we've got some really good ins in that space and really good connections in that space, which we're keen to explore even further.
Thanks, Damian. That's great.
Damon, you also mentioned your flexible playing options. What exactly does that look like in function?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Philip. I suppose, look, I think we all agree now that, your traditional, winter season or whatever season it is not always going to cut it for everyone, and particularly in this space where we know there's participation gaps, like so, particularly with our women in the cohorts that we know, the 50 plus, and even some teenagers for that matter. So that traditional, 20 plus season membership option, we still have. It's still core part of our business, but we also offer a lot of more flexible ones now. Whether it be 5, 10 game sort of options for people to buy into, and the social part of it. So if we have create social programs or competitions, we don't expect people to, if it's a 10-week program, if they want to come 3 times, 5 times, we don't care. We just want them to participate. So just trying to find ways that are not creating barriers for people, because we knew the entry to hockey was a barrier based on our traditional way of doing things. So we had to think more holistically in terms of the offerings we had. So we're always trying to find ways we can engage outside that, but they're working. Those flexible options absolutely are paying dividends today. There's no doubt.
Right. I'm just going to jump in case people aren't looking at the chat. Thanks, Kathleen. Kathleen put a comment up from my question that Tennis Australia's Play Our Way project focuses specifically on the migrant communities, and she's going to send me some info. So thanks, Kathleen. That'll be really interesting. And if anyone else is keen to hear about that, we can share that as well. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions in there? I've got one more. Sorry, Damian, I know you've mentioned that you measure your stats on your retention of people staying. What are some of those key strategies that have, really influenced retention?
Look, it's a good question. I suppose we've got to, like I say, we've always tried to find our retention. Like I say, it's not necessarily measured on numbers. It's about numbers in the programs. It's if we know that people have gone into a program and they're still in our sport 1 or 2 years later, we know we've got them in that regard. So it's a matter of offering other things outside that program that you've actually put in front of people. You've got to give more opportunities and more options for people to engage. So we've had some people come on to even the walking hockey that now volunteer. So, you create other avenues for engagement in your sport. So we know that it's a matter of, and we've got to keep working. It's not something that just comes out. You've got to be really intentional around this sort of stuff and think about, well, how do we do it? So we are always looking at ways where we can engage people on any level within our sport. They don't necessarily have to pick up a hockey stick as such. So I don't know whether that answers the question, Philip, but that's what we try and do, in terms of that retention, just create as many opportunities to participate.
And I was just going to jump in there. I did include the link through to the Basketball Tas webpage where all the women's and girls programs are. One thing it just reminded me while I was just scrolling through having a look at that is we've been very intentional, or Lara's very intentional with the imagery that she uses. So you'll see that all of the images included in that stuff are all emotional images where it's people smiling, high-fiving, clearly enjoying themselves. There's actually very few traditional action shots, if you like, and trying to highlight that it's not that the experience of getting involved in playing the sport, it's not necessarily about the sport for the purists. It's actually about how you're going to feel when you come and do this thing. And I think it's subtle, but it's really, really important that that you get the right images to demonstrate, what it is about playing sport and why you should come and do it. Particularly for beginners or women who maybe are thinking about joining but don't want to be compared to an Olympic athlete. I just want to have a social game on a Wednesday night, that sort of thing. So yeah, the images that are there are very intentional in the style of image used, and I think sport gravitates towards the action shots, and they're just actually not. They're pretty boring most of the time, unless you know the sport.
And point I'll make too, Philip, is it's this confidence thing that I sort of touched on too, like giving women the confidence to actually do take on roles, if you like. And I know we've changed our language in terms of when we're actually, seeking board appointments, we really want to make sure that they understand what they're getting themselves into, because a lot of women don't do it because they think, I can't do that. But when we actually break it down, it actually you get more buy-in, if you like. And we've done that, like even in coaching as well, like where we've got, a female coach mentoring a younger girl that, has got aspiration to do it, but it's just not quite ready. So you've got to give them the support around that and give them the confidence to do it. So I think it's a real key to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Ben, also, so when you applied for the grant for Lara's position, was that a tricky process in itself? And was there anything that you'll change about that process, or do you see those opportunities come up very often?
That one didn't come up very often. And the two things about it. It was an enormously large bucket of money. So that sparked my interest immediately. And I actually did the maths and tried to work out how many organisations nationally would actually be eligible for the grant, and realised that even if I put a reasonably average application in, I might actually be a sniff. So that was the first thing I did, was sort of go, wow, that's a lot of money, and I'm a half a chance just by putting my hat in the ring. The bit that if I had my time again, the scope of and the budget. So you had to do a budget up for a grant for a project that you haven't even worked out exactly what it is yet, that's going to start in 12 months' time or 6 months' time. I whacked some numbers in and got the grant application done pretty quickly, because it was a tight turnaround. If I had my time again, I probably would have spent a little bit more time trying to find ways to put together that budget in a way that was as vague as possible. If that's the best way I can put this. I know there's some people from the world of grants on this call, because it has actually been a bit problematic at the other end, where it's like, okay, I'll put a budget in that says we're going to spend this much money on equipment, for example, and now we want to spend 3 times as much money on equipment, but the grant won't allow us to, because, that's probably a bad example, because they have actually shown some flexibility on some elements, but there were other elements. So it was just like, can we just pivot this a little bit, and still within the scope of delivering the outcomes we think are important? But yeah, I didn't quite nail it on the application side of things to get it. Deliberately vague would be my advice to anyone, and sorry to the grants people on the other end of this call.
All those are really great too. Thank you so much, guys. We'll wrap it up there for today, but we really, really appreciate you both joining us and giving up your time today. So please give them some love in the comments for being with us today. And of course, you can also join us as a WSRT member for as little as $20, which just, again, further supports the work that we're doing. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on your lunch breaks. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks.